Here.
Duncan,
Here.
Haygood,
Here.
Make,
Here.
Manning, Marquez, McKinnish,
Here.
Parker Murray,
Here.
Petra,
Here.
Sullivan,
Here.
Waligorski,
Here.
White,
Here.
Zoe, Edwin, I heard you a moment ago. Are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Present.
Okay. All right, we'll go back just one more call for voting members, and then we'll go to the non-voting members, then we'll ask you to mute your phones. Manning. Hadley, are you on?
I'm here. Sorry, I had a mute issue, but I'm here.
All right, great. Marquez. Judith, are you on the line? Okay. Oh, Judith, did you just join?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can now.
Oh, yes, I was muted. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Barella?
Here.
Okay. And from EA, do we have Monica or John? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for making time for an additional meeting of the Family Task Force. Bob Inco and company have completed their actuarial analysis, the draft to this point, and have made time to review that with you all today. We also have a short presentation that you all should see projected from Jeff's computer. We're going to ask Bob and his team to work through that very quickly, and then we will dive into the questions that you all have with the draft analysis that's been completed so far. So, Bob, turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Again, good afternoon to all. Before I start, I would like to thank, obviously, the task force for allowing us to perform this actuarial study, and of course to Jeff and Admira for their assistance and support. And of course, thank you for allowing us to participate in this meeting from Miami, where obviously it's 72 degrees. As we do with all our clients, we do not finalize our report until after we've discussed the preliminary results. And so, as Greg has indicated, this is draft for discussion purposes. Our version of the report is draft for discussion purposes and subject to finalization after this presentation and our discussions. Obviously, in preparing the report, we try to be as explicit as possible in showing off our assumptions and methods so that you can evaluate the reasonableness of our estimates. And we're looking forward to your comments and insights. Anyway, I guess I have there the outline of my presentation. We'll start out by showing off the task force recommendations, which obviously you guys all know about. We'll present the summary of our results, the results of our analysis with some quick insights and observations as well. We'll go over the actuarial approach, comparison of the assumptions that we used in performing the calculation for the low versus high benefit models. We used some models and judgments as well in our projections, and so we'll identify what those are, and we'll remind you of the limitations of our study, and of course we'll end up with questions and answers. So going to the next slide, this is the task force recommendation, of course, broken down between the low and the high benefit model. And you guys are all familiar with this. The biggest difference, of course, is in the maximum duration, 6 weeks low, and more than double that, 14 weeks for high. The next slide. These are the results of our projections, and of course, like I indicated, the maximum. I mean, the biggest influence, of course, is the difference in the maximum duration. One insight I can present here is that although there's a more than a twofold increase in going from low to high when it regards to maximum duration, the increase in premiums is less than twice-fold, so to speak. And the reason for that is that we're basically assuming that workers are less likely to use up the maximum duration allowed, the higher the maximum duration is. One insight from this summary as well is that over the 10-year projection period, the metrics such as premiums, losses, and expenses, and so on, have almost doubled, and that's due to the trend factors that we've used, which I will talk about later as well. And the additional insight is with regard to the premium rates. While premiums have almost doubled, the wage base have increased by only 20%, and hence the increase in premium rates. Again, premium rates defined as premiums divided by wages. And of course, we are also showing an increase in the number of claims in going from low to high because of the higher utilization rate that we're using for high relative to low. So with regards to the next slide, we're showing there separately for low and high, again, the premium rate as well as the fund balance. I'd like to talk about fund balance relative to the threat of solvency. The threat of solvency being the possibility that claims could turn out to be worse than expected. And to ensure that the program itself is solvent, we have to have enough fund balance to address the uncertainty that claim benefits might turn out to be higher than expected. So the fund balance that we're showing there is basically how much more premiums we would have collected over the 10-year period so that we have enough to pay for higher than expected claims. Again, basically to take care of the threat of insolvency. The next slide basically shows the actuarial approach that we went through. We start out with calculating the cost of benefits, which is shown in Exhibit 5. The cost of benefits basically is the starting point of all our calculations and projections. In calculating the cost of benefits, we identified the three factors that influence that amount: the average cost, the utilization rate, and the projected number of covered workers. And we went through and explicitly showed what our projections are for each of those. And for the average cost, we also showed explicitly the two factors that determine the average cost, which is the average replacement benefit, and the average duration. So having calculated the cost of benefit, we then calculated the premium rate shown in Exhibit 2, the paid expenses shown in Exhibit 3, the number of open claims, Exhibit 4, projected loss reserves in Exhibit 6. And also we added Exhibit 7 to show the estimated additional cost if we were to extend the bonding period by another 12 weeks. In preparing those exhibits, next slide, in preparing the next exhibit, the prior exhibits, obviously we prepared some appendices to support those exhibits. And I'm showing there what those appendices are. Appendix A, basically showing the parameters, comparing the parameters for low versus high benefit model. Appendix B, showing the weights distribution, which is based on the demographics for Colorado, as well as what the cap average weekly benefit is. Appendix C shows the projection of the number of claims for 2019. Exhibit D, calculation of paid loss to cash flow. And Exhibit E, comparison of result with Stifler's, which is basically a test of the reasonableness of our projections. So in the next slide, as I indicated, we had to internally develop some models and use some old models that we have, as well as judgments in coming out with our estimates and projections. So for the solvency ratio, basically the solvency ratio is how much higher the premiums should be collected to achieve a higher level of confidence that solvency is going to be maintained. And in our projection, we use a 75% confidence level, consistent with what most government clients that we work with use. And we went through a Monte Carlo simulation to do that. And our simulation suggested that for claims, we should charge an additional 20%, and for expenses, an additional loading of 5%. The payment pattern is what we needed to determine how much is still unpaid at the end of the year relative to the claims that were triggered during the year. And we used our internally generated loss development model to do that. And that model suggested that 80% is paid in the same year that claim is triggered, while the rest is paid the year after. We also used the Monte Carlo simulation approach to figure out what the potential impact is of imposing a 52-week duration to the maximum number of durations. Again, limiting the maximum duration over the 52-week period to twice the limit per event. We came up with a reduction of 5% in claims for both the low and the high benefit model, based on this Monte Carlo simulation. Next slide basically shows how we came out with the expense ratio. We started out with 6.94% for the low benefit model, and a little lower for the high benefit model. And this is based on information that we gathered from 2 years of experience from New Jersey, and based on a study that was done for Colorado as well. We took this initial expense ratio and gradually decreased it over the 10-year projection period, basically to reflect economies of scale that might be operating. Earlier, I also talked about the fact that over the 10-year period, numbers such as premiums and cash flow had doubled. That's because of the trend rates that we're using. And in the slide, I'm showing the assumed trend rates that we've used. The major trend rates are coming from the utilization rate. Again, this is how much we think utilization rates should be increasing per year over the 10-year period. And for that, we're using 3.53%, which incidentally we got from the experience in California. We also trended wages at a trend rate of 2.82% per year. And we also assume that labor force, the number of workers will be increasing at a rate of 2.65%. The net impact of all these trend rates, by the way, is 8% per year. So I want to just end up my formal presentation by indicating that obviously, although we believe that the assumptions and methods that we used are, and of course our projections are reasonable, we could still be way off in predicting the future. And suggest that what is really important is to monitor the actual results closely as they develop, and to update these projections that we came up with frequently, especially in the early stages of the program, so that we can modify our projections to reflect the actual results to date. And with that, I end my formal presentation, and now open for responding to questions and suggestions that you guys might have.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate you giving us that overview in the first 20 minutes or so. We'll conduct the remainder of the meeting, or at least the majority of the remainder of the meeting, like we typically do. So if you can indicate your desire to speak either verbally, if you can break in, or in the chat function online, and we'll go ahead and monitor chat and try to create a little queue of questions to ask Bob. Okay, Edwin's keyed in first. Edwin, go ahead. What do you have for questions?
Hi, Bob. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a couple of questions. The first regarding the let me pull this up here. Regarding the expense ratio.
Yes.
In that from the low benefits model to the high benefits model, there's an increase in the number of claims by about 5%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Edwin, can you reference what page you're on of the report?
Yeah, let me pull that up too. Sorry. Let's see. BC. Sorry, let me get pulled. I'm trying to pull up the last the latest report.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's let Bob answer the question, and then from here on out, if you can, everybody, just give us a page number so that we can so that Jeff can direct us to the same exhibit in Bob's preliminary report. So go ahead, Bob.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Okay.
You're saying that the number of claims have increased, right?
Yeah, in terms of
high.
in terms of the number of claims between low and high is about increase of 5% in terms of number of claims.
Okay.
And then, but the expense increases by, I think, something like 47%.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Uh,
and my sense is that that number should be refined based upon my understanding of incremental cost for additional additional clients, or at least in the business world, incremental cost for additional client in this case would be very, very small relative to the fixed baked in cost or fixed cost.
yeah. I hear you. I guess what precipitated a possible increase such as that magnitude that we have is that with a much longer average duration, there's a possibility that the claimant might be uh, taking benefits in chunks rather than in one lump sum, which then might suggest more processing required, and therefore a higher cost per claim.
Yes, I fully recognize that.
I
But it seems
don't.
like,
I mean, I don't know exactly how much more processing. It could be. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be double, but we figured maybe 40% is not unreasonable relative to the increase of the number of claims as well.
well,
So it's a
I have,
judgment call,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and so.
I suppose then that's a question that can at least someone who may have some insight into this would be someone, Jeff, if some may be able to give us some insight into what would be the incremental cost to since you have everything pretty much built out, and if you get it one additional claimant, would that cost of that claimant increase by almost 50%, or something else that at least in the business world, given the business model we're looking at, seems like that would be a much more reasonable number, would be substantially smaller than that.
So, yeah, Edwin, I'm happy to join in where I can. And again, Bob and I had some extensive dialogue along these lines over the last couple of days, and most of our dialogue was focused on the level of increase of admin costs over the 10-year period. I had some initial concerns about that estimate in terms of it doubled originally over that 10-year period, and now it's increased by, I think, 26% over that 10-year period. And so it's hard for me to evaluate what the initial administrative expenses might be from the low to the high. My basis of comparison would be, because I've never administered this particular program, my basis of comparison would be the claims load for each of the respective programs, and that being sort of the launching off point. In my rudimentary analysis, that the starting point of the high benefits model might be a little bit high, but it's probably within a ballpark of 90%, I'd say.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then my second question relates to the average claim weeks of low benefits to the high benefits. And in this case, I'm trying to reconcile in terms of how do I refine this in terms of if the low benefits model and the average model claims is correct, then given the same population, then it seems like the increase to the increased number of average claim weeks doesn't seem to hold, or vice versa. And by way of example, in a given population, and we only have a marginal, a relatively small increase in number of claims. So let's assume that it's the same population, same number of claims. Then people who, with the exception of bonding, people are not going to change the number of weeks that they're going to be hurt and be out of commission. So whether it's a high benefits or low benefits, seems like if we pick one, then that as accurate, then it will substantially influence the other one. And coming from the low benefits model of what was the average of, what was it, about 6 weeks or so? Is that correct? or about
Yeah.
6 weeks or so, that population not going to change the number of weeks that they're going to be injured because of the higher benefits that's available to them. At least logically, that would be my conclusion. That if someone breaks their leg and it takes them 6 weeks, they're not going to somehow change that to 10 weeks because there's higher benefit level.
Oh, so you're suggesting that basically we came up with a measure called average number of weeks relativity, and that is the relationship between what we think the average duration relative to the maximum. So you're saying that someone who's taking 6 weeks when the maximum benefit level is 6 weeks, more likely will stick to 6 rather than go to much higher level when the maximum duration is 14 weeks.
Correct.
So compare that to our assumption where we might be saying that guy will increase his duration to maybe let me just see, maybe to 9 weeks instead of 6 weeks. So you're
Correct.
saying stick to 6 weeks.
Well,
He's not going to be influenced by that much higher maximum duration.
Exactly, provided that the low benefit weeks available is less than the average weeks claimed.
Sure.
And then that if given it's the same population between high and low, they're not going to say, well, just because I broke my leg, therefore I'm going to break my leg 3 weeks longer or however many weeks longer because there's a higher benefit.
Okay. That seems to be contrary to the experience that we were able to gather. And I think, Arvin, are you there? Hello? I don't know if I listen. But anyway, we were able to get experience from some of the states, including California, and basically what the experience suggests is we had a relationship between average duration and maximum duration, and we have observed that as the maximum duration has increased, so has the average duration. Basically, we develop a regression line between these numbers, and that's the basis on which we came up with our average duration for a higher maximum limit.
Yeah, I can fully appreciate that process. But the part I'm trying to reconcile is in real world situation, how do we account for that discrepancy between low benefit and high benefit if we're talking about the same population in terms of the average weeks claims increasing when it's the exact same population or statistically the same population?
Well, there is probably a part of the population that will stick to the same duration even when the maximum duration increases, but there are probably some as well that will be influenced by that higher maximum duration and therefore take advantage of that longer period. Wouldn't you say? I mean,
well, that would make sense only if they're hitting if that population is hitting the low benefits model's maximum weeks allowed. Correct?
Yeah. Admira, go ahead.
Maybe to just jump in. I mean, Bob, is it possible that difference could be, your doctor's note initially might say that you need 9 weeks to recover, but you might max out the low benefits model sooner. Yeah. And then So the higher benefits model, when you look at the numbers, reflects the additional weeks you would have taken had you been allowed under the low benefits model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recognize that as well. But given the fact that the average week is still below the low benefits maximum weeks allowed, would suggest to me that should not be as big of a factor. Whereas if the average weeks claim is basically top lining the low benefits maximum weeks, then I can see that being much more influential in the cost difference.
Okay. All right. So next in the queue, and I think what we need to do is we need to give Bob a number of things to consider, and like we've done with other experts, there are certain things that can be reconsidered. There are certain other things which we probably won't have any more data on in the future than we have already, and there's an assumption that needs to be made. But I think you've raised a couple of good points, Edwin. We'll go to Kathy and then Tara. Although, wait, I'm sorry, Tara. Go ahead, Tara, with your clarification around Edwin's question.
Sure. I just wanted to follow up because I think this is an important point of confusion to clarify. So I think the confusion here is that the average is below the maximum allowed. So for example, that they're projecting that on average people will just use 5 weeks when the maximum is 6. And if I'm repeating something that happened in the last 60 seconds when I accidentally dropped the meeting, I apologize. That average comes from a distribution, and a certain fraction of people will be higher than that average and at the ceiling of 6. And particularly with a low ceiling like 6, you would actually expect a fairly large fraction to be at that ceiling of 6. So once you raise the ceiling up to 9, up to 12, up to 14, those people that were bound at the ceiling are going to go up. That's going to pull the average up. So I think that the work that is done here that predicts a higher usage of weeks as you raise the maximum here is entirely correct. And it's also really consistent, as Bob said, with what we see in other states. So for example, if you compare New Jersey to California, California has a maximum disability weeks of 52. New Jersey has a maximum weekly weeks of 26. If you compare actual usage, New Jersey's average is around 10 weeks of disability usage, so well below the 26. And if you look at California, their average is around 20, right? Because that, again, that upper tail pulls the average up. I apologize if I repeated anything that Bob said during the period where I dropped the meeting.
You didn't, Tara. That was helpful and appreciated. Okay, let's go to Kathy for her question, and then we'll go back to you, Tara, for your question.
Hi, thanks, Bob, for you and your team for all of your work over a holiday weekend. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I just had a couple of questions. So, and I asked this, and maybe it didn't make sense to me, but when you talk about trending up the wage rate, it makes sense to me that wages are going to increase over time, just as workforce is and population are going to increase over time.
Oops, Kathy, we just lost you. Kathy, are you there? Ah, bummer. Kathy, it seems like whichever method you're using to call in has frozen. Let's jump to Tara, then we'll come back to you, Kathy.
All right. Thanks a lot. This actually works out well because my questions are actually also about the projected weeks of benefits. So it follows right on the line of questioning that Bob was just previously answering. So I want to first say that I've always felt like the most difficult part of doing some sort of analysis of this program is exactly on this weeks of benefit number. It sounds like Kathy's trying to All right. And the reason is because that number is really crucial for the cost projections, but we just don't have any good data to make that projection. And so what I see from responses to the earlier emails is that what he did is he took the data points from New Jersey, California, Rhode Island, and basically projected out a predicted weeks of usage based on the maximum allowable. Am I saying everything right so far, Bob?
Yes, yeah. The maximum duration is the variable, and we're trying to figure out the relationship of the average to the maximum.
Absolutely. And so I want to say that I'm about to ask some questions about our uncertainty based on that, because this is such a crucial number for the cost projections. But I want to say I don't have any quarrels with the decisions you made. There just isn't very good data available. I just want us to make sure we fully acknowledge any limitations of this of these projections, because this is such a crucial number. So the first thing I kind of noticed as I was thinking through how these numbers have been created is that you basically are stuck with only 3 data points: New Jersey, Rhode Island, and California. And you're projecting out based on these 3 data points. And one thing is that when you look at the data points you have for the weeks allowed for bonding or family care, the weeks that are the maximum weeks in New Jersey, California, and Rhode Island are 6, 6, and 4. So that means when you're projecting out weeks usage at 14 weeks or 26 weeks of bonding, you're projecting way, way out of anything we actually observe in the data. And so we have to take these numbers as fairly tentative in that regard. Is that a reasonable assessment?
That's reasonable.
Yeah. And on the same side, on the disability side, New Jersey, California, and Rhode Island, their maximum weeks for disability are 26, 52, and 30. So if we're projecting back to a maximum of 6 or a maximum of 14 for disability, we're also projecting way out of sample from a start of just 3 data points. So we also have to recognize that these are very tentative projections in that direction as well.
You're right.
Yeah. Okay. So then the other thing that also occurs to me is that you are only able to model the weeks usage based on one variable, which is the maximum weeks in those states. But there are a number of other features of those state policies that would likely also affect the weeks of usage. So, for example, the wage replacement rate probably has a large influence on how many weeks of leave people take, in addition to the maximum allowable weeks. In this sample of data you're using to make these projections, in the period from 2015 to 2017 for these states, the wage replacement rates are all about 60%, all under 70%. So if the Colorado program ends up with a wage replacement rate closer to 90%, at least for low-wage workers, we might expect that the weeks used will actually be higher than what you're projecting. Is that a reasonable sort of?
Yeah, it is. It is.
The other thing that is also different is that also might have length of time people use the program is job protection. And so, again, if the job protection Colorado puts in place is more extensive, either in some way than the job protection that was in place 2015 to 2017 in these 3 states, and that also induces people to frees up people to take longer leaves, then that would also tend to end up with a higher weeks usage than what you are currently predicting.
Yeah. So we can apply a correction factor for all those things that you mentioned to what we came up with, and I'm open for what suggestions you might have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is that we just don't have the data, right? We have no data, right, for a state that has 90%, has a wage replacement rate, like we have put in both the high and the low benefit. So I think it's reasonable to say that it will likely be higher, right. Than what you're currently projecting in Exhibit 5. But, you know, in terms of trying to use data to give it kind of anything more than a very just, guess, right, is I would think would be extremely hard.
Yeah, but it shouldn't prevent us from, putting in some loading when loading is appropriate, though.
Okay. All right, those were my questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tara. Okay, Kathy White, you're back on?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Sorry, our
Yes,
internet
yeah.
went down. So, Bob, I just wanted to ask you about the taxable wage base. So, did you increase that as well as like overall wages? Like in the low benefit model and the high benefit model? Like
yeah,
I assume that as wages grow, if your taxable wage base is not growing and it's stuck at that 90%, you're going to have higher wages pay and fewer. Your wage base is growing, but your benefit is growing, but your wage base is static. And so would that affect the premium? And if both of those things floated, so what you're applying the premium to grows kind of at the same rate that everything else does, does that change how the premium grows? And I guess related to that is like when you looked at other states and their premium rates over, like, did you do a look back period to see how much their premiums fluctuated or maybe changed over time?
No, we have not. But going back to your comment on the wage rate and taxable wage rate, I guess I'm not quite, getting it. We assume that the wages, which is the basis for the replacement wage calculation, I mean, that's the influencing factor. We assume it's growing by 2.82%, but now you're introducing the concept of taxable wages.
Yeah, that's so the wages that are, like, I guess if you had overall wages, right?
Okay.
Maybe there's not a difference, but it just seems like, so if you have like I kind of think about property taxes, right? So like your rate is always going to increase if your base upon which you're applying that rate is either staying the same or shrinking relative to something else, the value, say, of the house or the property that you're taxing. So that's why I just wasn't sure if that was part of the reason why for all of the 10 years going forward, you have a slight increase in the premium, right? Because if the thing that you're applying the premium to is the same and everything else is growing, then it would seem like the premium would need to increase or the rate would need to go up because the base is staying the same. But if the base were to grow with it, right? And maybe it doesn't matter given where the wage cap is set at, right? The premium cap, rate cap. Like we don't apply the premium to wages above $90,000, right? In the low benefit model.
That's right.
So, I mean, as wages overall increase, but
oh, you're saying that
right.
the distribution
Maybe.
of yeah.
Yeah, like I was just noting that in other states that wage base upon which you apply the premium to grows kind of annually, right? They kind of do this actuarial adjustment every year and it kind of grows, but it doesn't seem like their premium rates over time fluctuate. Then and maybe they do increase at these regular intervals as you are showing, but I wasn't sure if that might have had something to do with that with that trend in your analysis.
Okay.
And it's a question.
I think, yeah, no, I think I'm beginning to. Premium rates are calculated by taking premium divided by wages, or yeah, premium divided by wages. Premium calculation is influenced by the replacement, wage replacement. And there's a formula on which that's calculated. Meanwhile, the base on which the premium rate is applied to is influenced by the wage, capping the wage collection amount. And so basically, I think what you're saying is that the trend for those are different, right?
Right. And would that then affect, and maybe it wouldn't because it's at a certain level that's too high, but so like, what about Social Security?
I think we need to take a look at that. I think that it's possible the trend rates are different, and therefore that should be reflected in the calculation.
Okay.
We can model that and see whether that's true or not.
Okay. And then I also had one last question. I'm sorry to monopolize your time. When I was looking at schedule 6, where it shows, and again, maybe this doesn't matter because I'm not an actuary. I will just admit that full on. But one of the things that I was wondering about is, so you show no beginning reserves in payment year 2024. And if we were to establish this program and have a year's worth of premium collections, does that help? Would that help the department build in like some higher reserve ratios if they have a full year to collect premium without paying out any benefit?
Yeah, if you collect premiums and then pay no benefits, then yeah.
For 1 year.
Yeah, collecting premiums and not paying any benefits will result in, pretty good starting reserves.
Okay, and just so sure I wasn't reading this chart incorrectly. The premium collections that start in 2023 are not reflected in this table.
That's right.
For beginning reserves. Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
And
so that would go a long way to aiding solvency and helping the department or whoever manage their reserves and the fund. It gives them a little cushion, yes?
Yeah. So
okay.
Are you saying that we should reflect something like that in our exhibit?
No, I was just here. Oh.
So, Bob, that is one of the caveats that's outlined in terms of the program design. In theory, is that there would be a lead time of 6 months to a year to build up reserves before any payments are being made.
Oh, okay. 6 months worth of reserve?
There's some dialogue about whether it'd be 6 months to a year. So I'd like some feedback from the task force. I think it'd be prudent to allocate in a reserve building of 6 months, and one could naturally assume that one could double that if necessary. Does that seem reasonable to the task force? 1 year.
In the legislation, I believe it said that it would begin 12 months in advance. I'll confirm that while we're...
That's definitely what it's articulated in the legislation. So if we're going by the letter of the legislation, then yes, Bob, we should factor in a 12-month period.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys don't have any problem in implementing that, collecting premiums and not paying any claims over that period, just so that you can build reserves.
Yeah, that's in experience for new states. I think Rhode Island had a shorter ramp-up time of 6 months, but that's because they were building on a program. They were building on their disability program. But some of the other states, I feel like, have given themselves a little more lead time, like up to a year, to collect premiums so that it helps with the long-term sort of solvency and managing of the fund over time. Thank you very much.
I think that would be an appropriate edit, Bob. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Just looking at the chat window here. No one else has jumped in on the chat. Is there anyone on the phone who would like to ask Bob a question?
This is Tara.
Go ahead, Tara.
I wanted to follow on the first thing that Kathy raised. I wasn't 100% sure where we left that. I just want to say that when I read over this report, I realized that was a mistake that the task force made in what we gave to Bob, that when we gave the set caps, the 90,000 and the 132,000 caps for the low benefit and high benefit wage base, that we did not direct in any way for those caps to be adjusted over time, which of course in the real world and any actual policy that was put in place, those would be tied in some way to the state average wage or to the Social Security program cap, and it would go up over time. And so I don't know if it's fair or reasonable for us to ask at this point to, it doesn't involve me doing a lot of the analysis to recalculate the premiums, allowing those caps to rise with, for example, the state, probably best to have it just rise with the state average wage, since that's something that Bob already has in his analysis, since he's already modeling and projecting the state wage distribution, because part of that premium growth is due to the fact that we failed to specify that in what we were giving to Bob. That was a failure on our part. We were so focused on the here and now, we weren't thinking the 15 years out in the future. So Bob, what's your feeling on that? Is that's easy to do, or like I said, it is our failure?
I'm sorry that Arvin, are you in the call?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Did we not assume that a certain portion of the total wages belong to the level up to 90,000 and up to 132,000, so that if that pie increases, then the proportion basically is the same?
Yes.
So in effect, we're assuming some kind of increase in the 90 to and 132,000 limits as the wage increases. I mean, as the wages grow also.
Okay, so you were assuming that the 90K and the 132K would be adjusted up over time in some way.
I think basically we did, right? By the way we did our calculation.
If you can confirm that, when I was looking at it, it looked to me like the way the wage base was growing more slowly, right? For the low model suggested to me that part of what was happening was that 90K was becoming binding. But if you in fact were shifting those up kind of along with growth in state average wage, then that's fine. But if you could just confirm that for us.
Okay.
If you didn't, and it's possible to provide us with premium calculations that do make that adjustment, that would be very useful. All right.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Okay. Okay. Will do.
Thanks, Arvin and Bob. Okay, Jared, next on the list.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for all this work, Bob. And do want to echo the question Tara just raised, because I think I was under the impression that we were tying to either a percentage or the full Social Security wage base, but I'm sure we also talked about the numbers, so maybe some of that got muddled. And in what was passed along. So thanks for looking into that piece. But I did want to just follow up on the second part of the question that Kathy raised about whether, and I think you said that you hadn't, so would just be curious if it's something that would be helpful in terms of looking back at how premiums have changed into the considerations that you made in California, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, especially since we have 10 to 15 years with California, New Jersey, and several years with Rhode Island. I know Kathy had raised that, and I think you mentioned that it wasn't something you had looked at. So just wanted to follow up and discuss that a bit more.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do. I just hope that we can get the numbers, I guess.
Okay. So pending availability.
We haven't. So far, I don't remember seeing the numbers on the studies that we have looked at. Arvin, do you confirm that?
Yeah.
The historical premiums by year for those states, California, New Jersey, Rhode Island. Oh?
I think I read somewhere that the premium rate for California is around 0.7%.
0.7% of what?
Premium rate is 0.7%.
Okay, but actually showing the premium amounts by year.
I don't think we have that.
Huh. Okay.
Okay.
We'll see.
So
we'll see what we can do. I mean, subject to the availability of the information that we can gather. We'll try to observe, how the premiums have changed in the last 5 to 10 years in those states.
All right. Thanks, Bob and Arvin.
Okay.
All right. Other people on the line who'd like to ask a question?
This is Diana Petrak. I have a question, Bob. We did ask to be included options for private plan opt-outs in both the high and the low plan. Could you explain to me where in the report I would find, or where in the data, or where that would fall out, for example, in administrative costs?
We did consider.
Go ahead.
Arvin, did you want to answer that question?
We considered the effect of private plan. Let me check what exhibit.
My recollection is that. Go ahead.
It's in the number of covered workers.
I'm sorry, number of
covered workers.
Oh, covered workers. Okay. And I do notice, and I haven't had as much time to spend with this report as I wish I had had, but I see footnotes on most of the exhibits that explain where the data was drawn from. And at the beginning, you say that you drew from a lot of other states beyond just California, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. But is there a way to kind of get a summary of the informational reports that you drew from, and where they came into play?
Yeah, I guess we can summarize that.
Because I was just noticing that, for example, on administrative costs, you drew from that annual report from New Jersey, and I was really interested to see that. I would have loved to, I mean, I'll go ahead and Google it and try to find it on my own. But that, that would be really interesting to me. And again, the question of what exactly is bundled in those administrative costs, because of the assumption that we're starting with having to build both the temporary disability and the family leave.
So we can identify for administrative cost exactly which publication we got the information and what page even.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
How about anybody else who'd like to jump in with a question for Bob and Arvin? So Jeff has a couple that have been emailed, so we'll go ahead and take those.
Yeah, so Bob, questions submitted on pages 13 and 14 of the presentation. Can you talk about which inputs were allowed to fluctuate in their Monte Carlo simulation and which ones were fixed? And then part B of that question, it would be helpful to know whether they included utilization rate as one of the randomly distributed variables or not.
I'm sorry, hang on. I have to go back to the presentation.
Presentation or final report? I think there might have only been.
It's the presentation, right?
No, I'm sorry. It's the final report. I apologize.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
13
I'm sorry.
And 14 of the final report. I apologize.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on which inputs were allowed to fluctuate in the Monte Carlo simulation and which ones were fixed? And then part B was be especially useful to know if they included utilization as one of the randomly distributed variables or not.
Okay, page 14. Okay, this is in the calculation of the solvency margin, right? I assume.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, the factors that influence the variability of the claim cost was considered. So we're talking about frequency, which is basically utilization rate, and severity, which is the same thing as saying average benefit cost. So those are the two things that were made to vary and for which the simulation was based on. And there was a item B follow-up question. Is that, or is that?
Yeah, and I might send you the first half of the question in writing. It might be easier to answer in writing. But part B was, it would be useful to know whether they include utilization rate as one of the randomly distributed variables or not.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, in effect.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then I just wanted to follow up back up with where Edwin started in terms of administrative costs, and I didn't underscore something that I wish I had, and I also tried to articulate it in an email, and that is that basically, and I leverage my experience in operating the unemployment insurance program in making this statement, and that is that because most of your costs are derived in terms of the premiums collected and a percent of the premiums collected. Really what drives the costs in unemployment, and I think it would be the same in this program, is that the costs are really a function of not premiums collected or even duration of claims, but it really would be a function of the volume of claims. So I think that gets back to Edwin's original point about the starting point for the high model on administrative costs. And if the starting point on claims load is only 5% higher than the low, why is there a great differential in the starting point of administrative costs in the high model? So if that's just something you could look at, I agree with Edmund's assessment in terms of my own operation of the unemployment insurance program.
Jeff, I wonder if you can also consider the fact, which we've been thinking about internally among ourselves, is the fact that with the longer maximum duration, the can file claims in chunks rather than in one claim application. Is that right?
Yeah, that falls into the category of continued claims, and that really has no, has little administrative bearing in terms of operations.
Okay, you don't think that the additional processing would result in higher cost per claim? Because I guess that's the assumption that we're making when we came up with the maybe higher than what you think the starting point for high should be.
Yeah, so that would mostly be automated unless we're re-adjudicating a continued claim. If the claim has been approved for X number of weeks and there's just a continued filing, then that's going to be automated in terms of the payments.
Oh. So you don't think that there's an incremental cost from those type of claims?
There might be a small, a marginal one, but I don't think it's a pronounced one.
Okay. So basically...
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Kathy White.
Hi, Bob. I just had another question about, did you find that this analysis and doing this analysis was similar in some ways to doing the same kind of actuarial analysis for workers' compensation?
No, there's hardly any information. We had to rely on other people's study, and it's not really. There's a lot more uncertainty in this study because of lack of information that might be available for workers' compensation. And it's a fairly new program in most states, even for those states that have it in place. So.
Okay. Thanks for that answer. Others on the line? Questions for Bob and Arvin?
This is Kevin. Can I ask a question now?
Sure, Kevin.
Yeah.
My concern echoes the questions that Kathy and Jared had to say about the annual increase in the premiums. You referred to an EDD study in 2015 for California showing that usage of the California program had increased. I guess the annual growth rate was 4.6% or something like that. But the usage had certainly gone up. But we don't know what's happened to the premiums. With the National Academy of Social Science Insurance publication that Jeff circulated, at the beginning of this, the employee contribution is 1% of the first 118,000 for PML and PFL. So I would imagine that's relatively recent information. The California program has been in existence for a long period of time. The EDD study showed participations going up, but that premium rate, it may have increased, but at the time of this publication, it was 1%. It hasn't seemed to have gone up that much. And I'm not sure if my memory on this is correct or not, but it seemed to me that Professor Applebaum mentioned that the premium would adjust depending on the size of the reserve account. I mean, if the reserve is real high, the premium rate went down in New Jersey. So I'm just saying it's going to be very difficult to accurately model the upward pressure in premium rates from one year to the next. That needs to be very, very carefully considered. Not just, I would say, look at what other states are doing, like Jared recommended, Kathy recommended, but to look at any fluctuations of those things going up or down, because that's a very important component of your study, is showing this thing's going to get more and more expensive. Well, we need to see if other states have really experienced that. That's my comment.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. We'll
go back to Jeff.
So, Bob, I had one more question. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask, and that is that I'm on page 13, 14 of the report, specifically on the utilization rate trend and it increasing 3.5% annually. I was a little bit surprised to see. I think that most states have seen a plateauing effect over the course of time with this program in terms of its utilization rate. You're not predicting a plateau in the first 10 years, a stabilization of the utilization rate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, because the 3.53% that we got from California experience is over a 10-year period for California as well. So we thought that might be appropriate.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else on the line? Questions for Bob and
Arvin? Greg, I'm sorry. This is Kathy again. Just to follow up on something that Jeff just said about the plateau.
Yes.
And what Tara always keeps coming back to, which is more data. I mean, isn't it the case though that at some point you're going to plateau just because birth rates are such as they are, and injury rates and cancer rates are sort of such as they are. So there would reach if you were to do this analysis on into the future, another 20 years or something, there would be some sort of natural plateau, right? Just based on the types of things that this is covering.
I agree. I agree with you. There should be. And you know what? Let me just explain about the 3.53% effective trend rate for California. Unfortunately, we were not able to get a year-by-year trend rate to see whether it's plateauing or not over the 10-year period for California. The 3.53 is the effective trend rate over the 10-year period. So it's possible that in fact there is some plateauing going on in California, maybe where they started out with maybe 5%, and then now the more recent year the trend rate might be 3% or 2.8%, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, we don't have that data, and so we think that the 3.53 is appropriate over the 10-year period, but not on a year-to-year basis, or not showing the plateauing that might be going on. So that's
okay. Thanks. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Bob, this is Stacy Campbell, and I know that we've asked you a lot of questions. How are you? And thank you for doing this. As I go back to the purpose, CDLE was to engage you or your company to conduct an actuary study of the short-term and long-term solvency of the proposed family medical leave insurance program based on the task force's initial recommendation. And I know people have kind of asked very specific questions, but I'd like for you to tell us kind of at a high level, what do you believe your report shows us as it relates to short-term and long-term solvency of this program?
to me, um, I guess basically the way we looked at the task given to us is basically the way we ran with it is to figure out what level of premiums should be charged to reach a certain level of solvency. I guess that's how we interpreted the task given us. And so that's what we did. I mean, we figured out that an additional 20% should be collected for premiums to cover for the cost benefit, and then 5% additional for expenses. And then we determined the level of fund that might be available over time to take care of the possibility that claims might be greater than expected. So when you talk about what is the level of solvency, I think the level of solvency is more a question that relates to what actually happens based on the actual experience. That so 5 years from now, you can with actual numbers coming in, we can tell you, okay, the level of solvency is this much. 10 years from now, based on the actual experience to date at that point and how much fund has been accumulated, we can tell you the level of solvency. So we didn't think that that's an appropriate question at this time with no actual results yet. And so that's how the way we did it is how we interpreted the question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Bob?
This is Diana, and maybe this is just a detail. I'm still trying to figure out where the impact on the administration. It says on page 14, the effective private plan trend is a reduction of 0.04%. And then below it says per Washington State experience. And the Washington State, they haven't paid out benefits yet. Am I correct on that? So, and I also understand that the parameters or the requirements for having a private plan opt out are different among all the different states. So, I guess
So if I can jump in real quick here, to your question, correct, Washington State hasn't, or they just started, right? They're going to start paying out benefits in January. However, they have been collecting premiums. So they've already gone through the process of the opt-out and figuring out that. So they do have solid data upon which to base that.
Oh, okay.
And my recollection is not significant, the impact of this opt-out. I believe it's only 0.1%. That have opted out.
Is the number okay?
Right. In Washington, or at least that's what the either the prediction or the estimate is. So when you're looking for the impact, maybe the impact is not that much.
It's not. Okay.
Yeah, it's not.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe that's why it looks like it's not there. It's very small.
Okay.
Oh.
Others on the line? Questions for Bob?
So Bob, this is Danny Haygood. I'm trying to track with the question that you just answered. So in Washington State, who does have an opt-out for employers who have an equivalent policy, what you're saying is that the opt-out rate is low, so there's not that much impact to the overall plan or the solvency, correct?
Yeah, that is what is inherent in our report.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Feel like a broken record. Who else for Bob?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yes. So Bob, in very layman terms, for a layperson like myself, on page 14 and page 13, in terms of the premium cost, is it basically on a $1,000 for your typical Coloradan, a typical Coloradan, for every $1,000 they make on the low benefit model, they're paying about 70 cents, and I'm sorry, they're paying $7, and the high benefits plan, they're paying about $11. Is that
for
2024?
Yeah, for 2024. Yeah, 0.007 per dollar. So for every 1,000 is $7. $7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Versus say $11.40, correct?
Let me just check. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Others?
So this is Stacy Campbell again, and it's not so much a question. Maybe it's not a question to Bob. Maybe it's a question to our group. There's been a lot of things that it sounds like, were raised today. And Greg, if I am stepping on your toes, tell me to stop talking, and you can do this. But my question is kind of, what do we do from here? We're supposed to get, and Bob, I understand what I think I hear you say is that the information is as good as it could be given the lack of kind of specific information that we have. But given that there have been certain things that have been pointed out, is it that we are going to have Bob kind of include those things in a revised or supplemental report, or what is kind of the next step, I guess? And
yeah, so that's a good transition, Stacy. I was going to ask a similar question. So Bob, you I thought put it well when you said that your team doesn't finalize until you've had a chance to dialogue with the client and discuss the product. So what are next steps for you and your team in terms of considering some of the dialogue today and turning that around into a final product?
Well, there are a few things that we can modify, although, they're not exact numbers to base the modification on, but some judgment. So, we can do that. I guess I'll have to review some of them with Arvin and maybe with you as well, Jeff.
Okay.
But and then maybe for some of them, I might go back as well to get some further clarification from the person that asked the question.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, instead of having a supplemental report, in as much as we've not finalized this report anyway, then we'll just modify it before it's finalized.
Okay. Lydia and Stacy, do you think it's acceptable that, to Bob's point, that he and Arvin brainstorm and maybe have a dialogue with CDLE, and then we would get back to the task force in terms of when we might be able to expect a final product on that? Does that seem reasonable?
Seems reasonable to me, but Lydia, I'll let you respond. I know Lydia's on, so it may be that she's on mute, and I thought to get off mute it was push 6 number sign.
Star 6.
I think it's star 6, memory serves. So
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Lydia.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for working so hard over the holiday to get everything this far. I think that's very reasonable at this point. Bob, what do you think or team, what do you think you need in terms of like a turnaround time for final report?
I think we need to summarize all the possible modifications that we'll have to make and come to an agreement with you guys as well that what we have in the list is complete. And then what are your requirements? I guess we'll
yeah. So Bob, our next meeting, this group is going to meet 2 more times. They're going to meet on the 16th, 2 weeks from today, and on the 17th, the very next day. So any changes that you would make would need to be delivered to them in advance of that, with enough time for task force members to absorb what the changes resulted in. So that's, in terms of a deadline, certainly we can't extend any beyond that. And the task force members do need time to ruminate on what you provide.
So with that in mind, I'd propose, Bob, and again, we can discuss this offline if it becomes problematic, but I would propose that at the outside, if we could get something turned around no later than the next Monday, the 9th of December, that would be close to ideal for this group, I would think.
All right. We'll do what we can, of course.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that dialogue, Bob, if there are certain pieces of it that are not available, but the remainder is, or, just let's be as flexible as we can to get the task force members as much information and as many answers as possible, as early as possible, rather than, a big surprise on the last day.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, sure.
This is Diana. Can I ask just one, and maybe it's not a question, I just want to make sure I understand.
Hello?
Yes? Is it safe to assume that we're thinking universal social insurance model? And I know we talked about the private plan opt-out, but an employer mandate, I would assume that would introduce a whole lot of other factors, and because there's so little data and experience on the employer mandate, there's no way of knowing how that would impact some of these costs or the administrative costs, etc.
So I'll jump in here. This is Jeff. So the employer mandate was not in the scope of this work product, and so right. I think it's extremely challenging to say that the information from here could be mapped to an employer mandate model as a one-to-one.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming. So most of what we're looking at here is based on a universal social insurance model.
Per the legislation guidelines in terms of the scope of what we're asked to contract. Yeah.
Right.
But Jeff, clarify for me, aren't we going to get some private mandate insurance, some private insurance actuarial study from Pinnacle next week as well?
I don't have a definitive answer on that, Kathy. I think that may be in the works, but I don't have a definitive answer on that.
Okay, thanks.
So, other questions for Bob?
While you all are thinking about any last questions, I just have an administrative housekeeping thing, and that is just so everyone knows, and it's well documented that this is a draft and that it could be subject to change. This draft report was put up on the internet under the FAMLI site. This is a public meeting, as you all know, and so we have people that are listening in listen-only mode. And so for the purposes of this being a public meeting, the draft product was put up on the website, the 1129 version. That will, when and if we get a final product, that will be also published on the website and marked as the final product, just as an FYI to the group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understand.
So,
thank you.
Stacy, I thought you were going to go a little bit different direction with what you asked earlier. And my question would be to the task force. We have a couple hours on the 16th. We've got most of the day on the 17th. We can continue to chip away at the items that we haven't covered. That was the purpose of the 16th, or at least initially. Okay, items that we just haven't had dialogue on. And then on the 17th, at least get, and this is the question to you all really is, do you want to get to a collection of task force opinions with a number of supporting votes and a number of dissenting votes against each of them, and that be your final report? Are you looking, or could you imagine, or do you wish to, I guess, do you wish to conduct that last meeting in a different fashion than we have been conducting, or would you like to continue with the approach that we've been utilizing? And the answer may be you need time to think about it. Certainly, I'm going to work with Lydia and Stacy, Jeff and Admira, others from the department to come up with an approach. But I'd love, since we have a few minutes, if any of you have an opinion. We're winding down. The deadline is looming, and so anybody want to share how you're thinking about this?
This is Stacy Campbell. Kind of give some thoughts. I mean, as far as kind of getting to that final report, it seems to me that if we took the different 18 different areas we were kind of tasked with addressing, and maybe came back after Bob's report and put it out to the task force and maybe took a vote, where are we leaning? And then those who, if it's, I think we said 8, then we, move forward with the majority. But then if somebody had a minority opinion, we could identify who would write those. I believe at the last task force meeting, and I apologize for not being able to be there in person, I listened on the phone. Some people kind of maybe raised their hands to write some minority opinions there. But maybe in doing that at our last meeting, then we could set a deadline by when, the minority opinions would have to be in, and how we go about pulling together what our report would be. Those are just kind of some of my thoughts.
Thanks, Stacy. others have thoughts on how we bring this process to a productive close?
Hey, Greg, this
Yeah.
is Kathy. Can you remind me again? So we have a meeting on the 16th, and then,
Yep.
and what was our final meeting?
It's the very next day on the 17th.
Oh, okay. And then our final report is due on January 8th, right?
Correct.
No later than, yes.
And so how much of the task force report, I mean, maybe this is a good question for CDLE to like give us your honest feedback and assessment of what in the last 2 weeks of December with the holidays and the new year, what is sort of reasonable and desirable maybe, so that we can kind of bear the load or spread the load or spread the wealth or.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. This is Jeff. The timing couldn't be worse. I think we all recognize that. But it is what it is. And so what I want to start by saying and emphasizing is that the work product that we deliver is not a CDLE product. So the product we deliver is that of the task force, and CDLE is here to help. And I've had some preliminary dialogue with Stacy and Lydia on this. But CDLE is here to help organize that. But it really can't be a product that's original CDLE language or conclusions or, so we're able to pull things together for you. We're able to help format things, but it really is in terms of what the product looks like at the end of the day, and what's included and how sort of thorough it is or how bullet pointed it is. That really is to be decided by the task force.
Okay, but CDLE will support with the actual like writing of it, like just to talk about our process so far and.
Yeah. Look, we're more than capable of, in an independent manner, an objective, independent manner, to talk about, the legislation that created this, the dates and times of the task force meetings, the parameters considered, all of the inputs into the process. That's easy to pull together, and we have no problem doing that. It's anything that gets into conclusions, and we can document votes and help, cut and paste minority opinions, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of conclusions, we can't be the original authors on those things.
Yeah, that's understood. Okay, thank you.
So,
hey, this is Edwin Zoe.
Go ahead, Edwin.
Thank you. Thinking about the final product and looking at the process that we have gone through so far, I imagine it will be very difficult for us to come up with a set of recommendations where, for example, whether it's 12 weeks or 28 weeks. And if we were to try to do that, given my observation of what has transpired so far, it would take substantially more time to be able to pin things down to that level of granularity. And so it seems like where there are a few, I imagine so far I recall there's only been a very few instances where there were more than 8 or 9, well, more than 9 votes for a specific parameter, that we may have to present agree that these numbers and actuary report is our best effort at nailing down these costs and presenting as such.
Yeah, I think, Edwin, you're raising a good point. I don't believe there's an expectation that there be a single consensus recommendation. There are 18 factors, some of which have important dependencies and relationships. So I think for the group to share or to document where there was strong agreement, a high number of people aligned with a given opinion and minority opinion, and then also to express that in certain things, here is analysis that will help a policymaker zero in. So these ranges will help policymakers zero in on hard numbers that end up in whatever policy may emerge.
So this is Tara. I'd like to propose that over the next couple of weeks that Lydia and Stacy, maybe start developing some sort of process or procedure for how the writing of the bulk of the report is going to get assigned, and start creating some sort of framework for that. Because my understanding is that outside of the kind of very basic introductory material, most of that report is going to have to be written by task force members, and some of that will be on parameters where there's broad consensus. Some of that will be on parameters where there's different opinions, but somehow that's going to have to be allocated. And I think it would be useful to go ahead and have some structure in place for how that is going to happen, so we're not trying to figure that out in real time in our meetings. So we need some sort of framework for dealing with that.
Thanks, Tara. Lydia and Stacy, what's your opinion about that?
This is Lydia, and I agree, and I think that this is something that we had planned to talk about at the next meeting once we get all the parameters in. So I very much agree with the piece around we are just documenting the conversations that we've had, and there's going to be majority and minority reports, and that's fine. So I think once we are at the next meeting, we will know where we'll identify together where we need to write majority and minority reports. Hopefully we'll get some volunteers to help write those minority reports. I have carved out time in my schedule to sit down and to write some of the majority responses, and we'll work closely with Jeff and others at CDLE to make it flow with basic documentation of what happened over the course of the task force. And so ideally, we would like to get that out to the task force after our last meeting, but before that January 8th deadline for review, so that you know what is in that final report and what is going forward to the legislature. So I think certainly we'll have more to come on this, but there'll definitely be a place for volunteers, and we will look forward to helping you write those majority and minority reports as we identify them.
So,
Stacy, do you have anything else to say? Or go ahead, Tara.
Just to follow up on that, I think if you went through the list, there are already a number of those that we've already discussed, and probably about half of them that we're close to coming out. And so it seems to me there could be at least a preliminary discussion about that could happen in some way ahead of time. And maybe the ideas that you and Stacy are taking on, the larger role of writing, and that's kind of how you've been imagining it. But it seems like there's already several of the pieces that the bulk of the discussion has happened, and some preliminary understanding of how that's going to get written could already be taking shape.
This is Stacy. I think that makes sense, and I think what I hear you saying, Tara, is when we come to the meeting on the 16th, we ought to have, Lydia and I should have kind of a plan and maybe a framework of this is kind of what we've got together so far. We can have some comment on that, and then from there we can, kind of hopefully reach some agreement and move forward with individuals who are going to write certain portions of it that still need to be written.
Yes, and in fact, if that was something that could even be emailed out, like late next week, kind of, or something like that we could go ahead and take a look at. I said that just might be useful to get a feeling for where we are.
Okay.
Good point. Thank you.
Yep.
Sounds good. And Lydia and Stacy, I'll help with that process because I need to have that status in order to plan the 2 meetings with you all. So expect that I'll reach out to you tomorrow to get the balls rolling, okay?
Okay.
All right. Any other issues that we need to cover? So open forum. Well, in that case, Bob and Arvin, on behalf of the task force, thank you very much for your work on this to date and your continued support. Very, very impressive product in a short amount of time. So thank you. And
you're welcome.
If there are no other comments, I'll turn it over to you, Lydia.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So this, more information to come. We'll go ahead and adjourn for today, and I look forward to some emails between now and the 16th, and we will talk to you again in a short amount of time on December 16th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.